Welcome to the Western Bell podcast series, with talks on traditional spiritual teaching and its application in the world today. The intention of the series is to offer something useful for those who are drawn to study themselves and engage practice on the spiritual path. New talks are posted twice each month. The content of the talks is for informational purposes only and not to provide any kind of counseling, medical, or professional advice. This podcast is titled, Your Life is a Tree. The talk was given by Angelon Young and Regina Sara Ryan on May 9th, 2026 via Zoom. Angelon is an author and workshop leader with a background in Jungian psychology. Regina, who was the editor of Hohm Press for 35 years, is an author, workshop leader, and retreat guide. Both live on Triveni Ashram in north central Arizona. In this presentation, Angelon and Regina discuss the tree of life as a universal archetypal symbol. If interested, you can find images that were screen shared of the African, Celtic, Norse, and Cabala trees of life online. Angelon and Regina talk about trees as a metaphor for life and the human being. They refer to the Tibetan Buddhist master, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and to their own teacher, Lee Lozowick, and his Indian master, Yogi Ram Sarat Kumar, in the talk. During the live presentation, a 5-minute writing exercise was conducted. If you would like to engage this process, just pause the recording and continue it when you have finished writing. If there is benefit in this talk for you, please consider sharing the link to it or writing a review on social media or on one of the podcast platforms. Regina Sara Ryan speaks first, followed by Angelon Young.
I'm going to open our session with a poem from one of our favorite poetesses, Mary Oliver. When I am among the trees. When I am among the trees, especially the willows and the honey locust, equally the beech, the oaks, and the pines, they give off such hints of gladness. I would almost say they save me, and daily. Otherwise, I am so distant from the hope of myself, in which I have goodness and discernment, and never hurrying through the world, but walking slowly and bowing often. Around me, the trees stir in their leaves and call out, "Stay a while." The light flows from their branches, and they call again. "It's simple," they say. And you too have come into the world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light, and to shine.
It's beautiful. Mary Oliver. Well, I want to just read a very short little quote from Swami Papa Ram Das, the guru of Yogi Ram Sarat Kumar. Ram Das says, "You can meet God in the streets, in the bazaar, on the hills, in the cottages of the poor, in the palaces of kings, in hermitages and in jungles, in workshops and offices. At all places, at all times, God is with you." This is this, fundamental context of our talk tonight, that God does not live in the sky, as our teacher Lee used to say. God does not live in the sky. God is in all of creation. God is creation. So we wanted to start with this little short story that Lee was also fond of sharing. It's from the Tibetan teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, years ago when Trungpa Rinpoche was still a very young teacher in the States. It was the first time that he brought many of his peers from Tibet and India over to visit in the States, and they were visiting in Colorado. They were out walking with several of Trungpa's American students, or Western students, probably also Europeans. And as they were walking along, Trungpa Rinpoche stopped and he pointed to a tree, and he turned to his friends and peers, the other Tibetans, and he said, "They call that a tree." And they all just died laughing. They just thought that was hilarious. And Lee would tell that story, not uncommonly. It always landed with this communication of put aside your concepts. Do we really know what that is over there that we call a tree, this being? And of course, we're learning more and more about trees. Science is telling us more and more about the incredible lives of trees, the ways that trees commune with each other, the community that they have together, the mother trees, the way they protect each other. Beautiful, beautiful information. So we don't really know. So we're inviting you tonight to put aside your concepts of a tree. You're obviously into trees or you wouldn't be at this talk, would be my guess, my best guess. Could be wrong. But that's what we're going to do. We're going to take this symbol of the tree and the tree of life, which is a universal archetypal symbol that shows up in almost every culture known to humanity, and possibly every single one. I don't know one that doesn't show up in. We're going to take this symbol and we're going to circumambulate it. This is right at the center of Jung's work. It's very difficult to talk about the transcendent divinity and the immanent divinity, the divinity that's here and now in creation. It's very difficult to talk about these ineffable things like what is a tree or how are we relating with a tree in the mystical sense, or how are we relating with the divine in the mystical sense. But it's easier if we work with a symbol. And so Jung would say we circumambulate the symbol. We look at it from lots of different directions. And that's what we're going to do tonight. Regina and I gave this 5-day residential on Triveni Ashram and Sanctuary writing retreat back in February on this theme. And it was so rich for us and for everybody who was there. We just wanted to keep going with it because the metaphor, the symbol of a tree, and the universal symbol of the tree of life is just incredibly potent. So I'm going to read you some short thing that I wrote when we had like 5 minutes to write something. And then Regina's going to talk some. And then we're going to look at some pictures of the tree of life. So here we go. A tree is never just a tree. A tree is a mystery of creation, a poem of grave, glorious, and splendid secrets. A tree unfolds, emerges in time through its own timeless magic. A tree is one with her creator. There is no separation there. A tree magnifies the life around her. She nourishes all. A tree appears in space, roots in earth, drinks water to make her sap, dances in the wind, eats the fire of sunlight to make the nectars of her body. She endures seasons, change, storm, and even fire. She communes with the starry cosmos. A tree is a divinity in every way.
Well, our dear friend who's here tonight was also at our writing intensive for 5 days and sharing with us how she left the 5 days and she started just seeing trees that had lived around her for her life. And all of a sudden they were there. They were beings. They opened her. They were like a portal into a love of nature that was just magnified for her through this metaphor of the tree. So, what are we doing on a spiritual talk series talking about trees, So, and I think Mary's already made the point, but just to reinforce what Mary has already said, this is a portal into some deep appreciation of our own lives and the life of nature. So, my portion right now is to invite maybe just 3 of you at the most to tell a tree story. Everybody's got a tree. You've encountered a tree at some point in your life. It could be that tree that you went to when your loved one died and you sat beneath it. It may be a crying tree. Mary, please tell your story about the tree that spoke to you on Triveni Ashram when you first moved here.
Well, so we live in the high desert and we don't have big, beautiful deciduous trees, and we don't have 4 seasons in terms of the autumn, the turning of the leaves into red and gold and falling of leaves and the return of the pale green in the spring and all of that. So when I first moved out here, I was really grieving because I grew up amongst trees in the South. Trees all over the world have saved my life. Different trees at different times have like literally gotten me through the night of my inner contemplation. So I was grieving about the trees and I was really, really sad. And we have these things called pinyon pines and junipers. The juniper maybe gets about 12 feet high and the pinyon pine can get to be 20 feet high. But still, for me, I just couldn't see them. And I was just really sad about it. And I was walking along one day on the ashram, and all of a sudden something grabbed my attention, and it was a pinyon pine. It grabbed my attention. I turned and looked at this big, beautiful pine tree. And what literally came into my mind was, I am a tree. I am a tree. You are not without trees. Now I'm extrapolating. The tree only said 4 words, I am a tree. So that's my story. Regina loves that story, but it was completely real for me. And since then, the pinyon pines are very close to my heart, and they do commune with me in my own way. And I know that you all know what I'm talking about. That's the pinyon pine story. I am a tree.
I'll
Thanks,
share. Well, back in 1983 or 84, one of those years, I was in a silent Gurdjieff work weekend, and it was completely silent. We were doing a lot of work. I had only been introduced to Gurdjieff slightly before then, so it was very intense for me. I mean, there was so much going on. And so I would walk up the road a little bit during the breaks. Up the road, there was a huge tree that had a hole in it big enough for a person to sit inside of it. I would go to that tree almost every break and position myself inside the tree and sit there and just be with it. And it was so nurturing. It was so fulfilling to go to a safe place like that when I was feeling pretty out of my normal territory. That tree, it was like you were saying, Mary, it saved me in that situation. It was my go-to place. That was beautiful.
I love trees. We have a good sized yard, and I've planted so many trees since we've moved here. But to me, if I'm not feeling well, if I go hug a tree for a while, it really balances the energy and what's going on inside me.
In back of our counseling office in Tempe, there are several trees. And I noticed walking and being with a tree, that one tree was particularly receptive. If I walked up to it, I could feel the energy of its roots. I just felt it welcoming. So some of my work was with clients who were dealing with very heavy trauma, and they would be very distressed. They'd be sitting in the office. And so occasionally I would take them to the tree and just suggest that it felt right for them to go next to the tree, either chest first or back first or stand back, just whatever they needed to do. And it was always, I kind of have this sense of asking the trees permission first, just to make sure it's okay. And it was always a very healing experience and connected people with the abundance of nature and that resource.
Well, there's so many stories about trees, and I know that we all have them. But we're going to take a moment just to take a look at some of the universal images of the tree of life, because, you know, the tree, we know it intimately in our daily lives, and we have relationships with trees. But then there's also the tree as an archetypal symbol of the cosmos, in fact, and not only the cosmos, the macrocosm, but the self, the individual created being. So for ancient peoples from time immemorial, the tree has been a symbol of both the universal divinity that infuses all of life and the individual created being. So let's start with the African tree of life. We can screen share. This is one example. Of course, I found these online in images. This is a baobab tree. And for the African people, the baobab is really a sacred tree. And most cultures have a particular tree that's especially sacred to them. In Africa, it's the baobab. In India, it's the Bodhi tree. The Bodhi tree, of course, Buddha sat underneath that tree to complete his inner work of liberating his own being. But in this one, you can see the African tree of life, how the people are celebrating and the animals are there and there's ornaments hanging from the tree. And the tree just has this wonderful, friendly, all-embracing spirit to it. Now, let's go to the Celtic tree of life and take a quick look at that. For the ancient Celtic people, the tree of life is essential, and they're always depicted with these interlocking threads of life. The symbolism of that has to do with eternity and the cyclical nature of life and how everything is connected. All of life is interconnected. Nothing is separate. Nothing is separate. With this image, you really get the green, green, green of like growth and fertility and the beauty of green is a very special color associated with Venus and associated with Hanuman in the Hindu tradition. You get the roots, the sense of the roots, the trunk, the branches, the leaves, the flowers, like everything is there in this tree. It's beautiful. So as you're looking at these, let the image just come into you and speak to you however it does. I love this one very much. Let's go on to the Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil, here's one of my favorites. Yggdrasil is the name of the tree of life, the cosmic tree in the Norse traditions. And there's a wonderful story. Probably a lot of you know the story, but I'm going to give you the very short version of it because we don't have a lot of time tonight. Here's a gorgeous tree. There's a supernal, eternal, shining sun behind it, and this pool of water that's at its roots. This pool is called Mimir's Pool. And in the Norse myth, underneath the roots of Yggdrasil, the tree of life, is this pool that's guarded by a spirit called Mimir. And it's the pool of memory and knowledge. And I mean, everything is in this pool. And Odin, who's the All-Father in the Norse myths, he decides that he needs to get some more wisdom. There's wisdom in Mimir that he needs. And he goes to the tree and he wants to drink, he wants to sip from the pool of infinite knowledge and infinite bliss and infinite everything. All blessings are there. But Mimir, who is the spirit who guides Mimir's pool, he bars the way, even the All-Father, even the Father Odin. He says, you cannot drink from Mimir, you have to pay. And he has Odin give him this and give him that. And he has to give him several like really important things. And in the end, he finally says, Mimir says, okay, there's one last thing you're going to have to give. You're going to have to give me your eye. And so Odin decides to do it. And he gives him his eye. And of course, you know, if you've seen Thor and, you know, these great depictions of Norse myth from Marvel, I think, in film, you know that Anthony Hopkins is always wearing a patch over his eye. That's because Odin has sacrificed his eye. In the end, Mimir says, now, Odin, you've done everything I asked you to do, but you're going to have to hang upside down from the tree for 9 days and 9 nights. Because the number 9, of course, is very sacred. It's very sacred in the Hindu tradition. It's very sacred in the Celtic tradition and the Norse traditions. So, of course, Odin does it. He hangs upside down on the tree above Mimir. And when those 9 days are up, finally, he gets to have one sip. And when he gets that sip from the pool of knowledge and memory, or the Akasha, we might say in Sanskrit, he gets to sip from the pool of the Akasha. He is imbued with the knowledge of the runes. And so he brings back to humankind the gift of speech, language, and writing. So, you know, of course, this is an ancient story of the tree of life that's near and dear to writers and poets and wordsmiths. because that's where the gift came from the tree of life and from Mimir's pool in the roots of the tree. So we have one last tree we want to look at, which is from the Jewish tradition, from the Hebrew tradition. It's from Cabala. It's the tree of life, Cabala tree of life. And this we'll just barely touch on. It's a very, very, very old symbol. And it is showing us basically, it's like a glyph of creation. Up above the crown is only the boundless light. And then the life force comes down through the crown and it moves down through the tree, down to the kingdom, or queendom, we could say, which is the earth plane. That's the plane of the earth. But each one of these realms that you see, they're called in here in English, of course, there are Hebrew words that most of us, maybe someone on this call would understand, but most of us would not understand. So it's in English. Understanding, wisdom, severity, mercy, splendor, victory, foundation, which is the realm of dream and imagination, and then kingdom, the earth plane. And in the center of the tree, you'll notice, is the Sephirot called beauty. And this is the one in this tree of life that harmonizes and balances the whole tree. So for me, I didn't want to talk about the tree of life as a universal symbol without at least us looking at this for a few moments, because this is very old. It's very deep. It's a lifetime study, actually, for anyone who is called. So that's our little tour. We had more and we could have a lot more. And there's a beautiful Mayan tree of life. There's just so many different ones that we could be looking at.
I'd like to add here that my foundation, my heritage is within the Christian tradition. And there is so much in the Judeo-Christian, but now coming into the Christian with Jesus, so much imagery of the tree. I mean, Jesus says, I am the vine and you are the branches. And he has that whole paradoxical parable about the fig tree that was withered, and he had it cut down because it didn't produce the fruit that it was called to produce. And then, of course, he gets to carry a tree on his back and be crucified on it and hang on it. And as Mary's talking about the being who has to hang upside down for 9 days to achieve wisdom, and this symbol, this universal symbol of Christ on the cross, has interpenetrated our culture incredibly.
Yeah. You know, when Regina and I started the writing retreat in February, we began with the forest, and we didn't think we'd have any time to talk about the forest tonight, but I just want to mention before we move on to other things. And really, we're interested in just inspiring you with this. If this inspires you, work with it and use it, because it's a powerful living symbol. And you can begin with the forests. And I once made a list of all of the forests that I've known. Like maybe there's a particular tree that's in that forest. For example, I once lived in the Arkansas Ozarks for 6 years in a very remote place on 500 acres of land. And it was so beautiful. And on that land, there were many incredible trees. It was a deciduous forest. The autumn and the spring was magnificent. But on that land, there were these wild magnolia trees. They're called umbrella magnolias. And they're so incredibly beautiful. And they bloom in the spring with white magnolia blossoms. Or the aspen forests in Colorado. I've lived in Colorado for years. And when the aspens turn up in the Rocky Mountains, it is heaven. It's a heaven realm. It's literally like walking into a temple. The aspens grow together in groves. And yes, you'll see some single ones here and there, but they tend to grow together in groves. And walking into one of those, if you know that you are in sacred space, literally, it's incredible. I had the same experience of this sacred space in the forest because of the trees in the Black Forest in Germany. Or there's a forest in northwest France and the west part of France, the Celtic part of France, that's called a Brocéliande. It's a famous forest in France. There's all kinds of legend and mythic stories of Merlin and Lancelot and author and the knights and all kinds of wonderful things. And of course, the standing stones there. So, that might be something that you would want to do, like forests I've known, not only trees that I've known, but forests that I've known, because forests are made up of trees.
So I went to California to celebrate my 80th birthday last year with my sister and her family. And she said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Redwood forest." So they took me to a redwood forest. And the rest of the family was going off on one trail. And I said, "No, I got to be here by myself and just wander in this redwood forest." And the redwoods, it's like, if you've ever been there, there's nothing like it for me. So in the redwoods, wandering, and I come to this circle of trees. There's a little sign there that says fairy ring. So you step inside and these huge, magnificent redwoods, and there's a space in the center. So what else do I want for my 80th birthday but to go in and sit in the center of that fairy ring of redwoods and just be silent? Well, I'm in there for a couple minutes and I hear footsteps, and this group of about 6 people come tiptoeing in, and one of them whispers, "Will we disturb your meditation? We want to meditate in here too." So they come in and they all sit around with me. We're all sitting in this thing. We were silent for about 10 minutes. And then one guy says, "I hope you don't mind, but one of our people here is just having her birthday. And we would like to sing happy birthday to her in the redwood forest." So I said, "Oh, it's my birthday too." And so this group of total strangers inside this fairy ring under the redwoods sang happy birthday to me and this other woman. We all got up together and we all held hands, and 7 of us just about reached around this tree, holding hands around this one tree. I had a happy birthday. So I just thought it was just magic, absolute magic. And those of you who know me, I'm really tall. And the image of being a tree, like walking like a tree and holding myself like a tree, has been with me my whole life.
I love that story so much, Regina. The beauty of the synchronicity of it. And it was her birthday too. And I too have love of that forest. There's nothing like it. And there's also sadness in that forest. I have felt sadness amongst the redwoods because they've been decimated, It's hard to fall in love with trees if you don't want to have your heart broken, because of course it's heartbreaking what's happened to trees if you find out what's actually going on with the forests of the world. And so I think it's important for us to commune with the trees. I think it's important for creation for us to be connected with all kinds of beings in respect and in love and in honor, really honoring them. So we're going to circumambulate the metaphor of the different parts of the tree.
Yeah, so let's start with roots.
If your life is a tree, right?
We have roots, we all have roots. And what the tree demonstrates to us is that the roots go out in many directions. There's many subroots. There's a main root, and then there's smaller roots. But if we start to think about the roots of our lives, many of which are the belief systems that we inherited from our education, from our parents, whether our parents believed in God, whether they were in survival about money, what were our roots within our religious tradition. Now that I'm in my really elder years, I'm not quite in what they call old age, but I'm in middle old age. I'm finding that many of us at this point of our lives are looking back to what our roots were within our religious tradition. And we're looking to see where we have denied those. And some of us have denied them, perhaps too soon. And we're possibly looking back into those roots and seeing what was valuable, what we may have missed. And there are roots that, like if I take my orchid out of a pot and I look at the roots, some of them are kind of yellow and squishy, and they have to be pruned. So some of the roots, as I look back, gender roots, my cultural and historical roots, my familial roots, my parental roots, my nutritional roots. Wow, that could use some pruning. So we look at the tree and we look at the roots and we recognize that they are connected to the whole, no matter what age or stage of life we are at. It's really good to revisit our roots and to look at them with the possibility of, do I need to put some nourishing food at the roots? Do I need to prune some roots? Sometimes when you have a good plant, you have to cut a lot in order to get it to really grab the soil properly. So roots, yeah, really, really important. Mary, anything to add for roots? And then you can go on to trunk and branches.
Just one thing that comes to mind is that trees are not separate from other trees in their roots. Like there's a place where we are so totally interconnected. We could say in the world soul or in the collective unconscious. Our roots are very entangled and connected. And so often when we're feeling things, we're getting things through our shared root system. And that's true, in terms of the people that we're close to too, because we're growing together, If we're trees together, we're growing in a grove, maybe we could say metaphorically. So we're absorbing things, nutrients from others, from other trees. We're absorbing energetically all the way across the board, things that we want to have that nourish us, that are nutrients, but also maybe if the tree over there is diseased, we're getting some of that too, because we live in a world where there's a lot of fracture and a lot of pain and plenty of toxicity. So it's important to know that we are connected and that we're receiving. I'm just not me alone here processing all this stuff. I'm actually connected at the root. Anything else on that, Regina? You want to say?
Just personally, because I said my roots were in Catholicism, Christianity, and I've spent the vast majority of my life within a Hindu lineage. And to really nurture those roots, my Christian heritage, without denying the other, has been just incredible in my life. So I can testify to the beauty of that and really honoring those roots at the same time, not feeling like that's the only root in my tree.
I think also in terms of roots that, and what you're just now talking about, Regina, that even though, like for myself also, I was raised in the Christian church, not Catholicism. I was raised in the Methodist church, but I've spent my life exploring other paths and been deeply immersed in the Hindu path, like Regina, for years. But not only, primarily the Hindu, because my guru lineage is from India and from Hindu tradition. That it's really important for us, for me as a Westerner, and I believe this is true for all of us as Westerners, to know what our Western roots are, because they're there. We can deny them and deny them and deny them because our interests have taken us in many different directions in a lifetime. We've studied other things, we've practiced in other ways, and that's wonderful. And we still have Judeo-Christian roots, most people, even if we weren't raised in the church, because Judeo-Christianity permeates Western culture. Another thing that permeates Western culture is ancient Greece and Rome. Those are part of our psychic roots. Our soul is connected to that, like ancestrally, or our ancestral roots. So for me, in the last 14 years or so, I started getting very interested in my Celtic roots and my Celtic ancestors. And I was deeply nourished by that, diving into what were the ancient Celts into. It was like, oh yeah, maybe that's why I love trees. And for the ancient Celts, everything happened around a tree. It's like that in India too. So I have a couple of things about trunks and branches. A tree is divided into three basic parts: the roots, the trunk and branches, and then the crown. And the crown is like the leaves, the flowers, and the fruits. So many things happen in the trunk. And of course, the trunk branches. In a trunk, I got very interested in this at one point, these different parts of a trunk. A trunk has a growth ring, it has a pith ring, it has sapwood. There's all these different parts. of the trunk of the tree. And there's a lot of action going on in there. And I found this to be a really great working metaphor. So right near the center of the tree is this part of the tree called the heartwood. And it's actually the older and dead xylem cells, and they're found close to the center of the trunk, and thus they're usually darker than the rest of the tree. And those are filled with stored sugars, oils, and dyes. I thought, how interesting that that's called the heartwood. As we're growing older and we're maturing, we've gathered so much life experience. It's almost like that's our stored wisdom. So, of course, they call it the heartwood. It's interesting that they call it dead. I'm not sure that it's dead. You may have noticed that when you cut a tree down, the tree, like here in the desert, the tree will last, the snags of the tree will last for a very long time. That's almost all heartwood. So in addition to the heartwood, there's that aspect of the metaphor, and then there's other parts of the trunk that's going up into the branches, which is moving the nectar, the sap, the lifeblood of the tree from the roots up to the leaves and back and forth. I mean, of course, we have blood in our bodies, our vagus nerve, and in fact, our whole nervous system is very similar. If you look at it, it's similar to a tree. It has roots, comes up, and then it branches out. It's very, very interesting. But I want to take it a little past the science of the tree, which you can look into for yourself and enjoy and be inspired by it if you're so moved, to that every tree has a pattern to it. And that begins to show up with how the trunk grows and how it starts branching out. If you back away from a tree and look at it, and you get a sense of like the tree as the totality, as a being, that it has a coherence. Every part of the tree is part of that coherence. But part of that patterning of the tree, we all have patterning. We all have been through cycles and cycles. And we see that when you cut a tree down and you see the rings, the circular rings of the tree, literally showing you how the tree has grown through cycles and seasons of life. And of course, we're all going through that, cycles and seasons of life, creating our heartwood. So during our writing retreat, whatever theme we come up with, we do work with these patterns and these archetypal patterns that show up in our lives, these recurring themes. Like a tree is experiencing definite recurring themes: summer, fall, winter, and spring. Even here in the high desert, there's probably recurring patterns. There's definitely a monsoon season. It snows in the winter. The pinyon pines, they're having cyclical experience. The bigger they get, the stronger their trunk is, and the more branches they have, the more experience they've been through, and the more they've accumulated that into the heart of who they are as a tree. The thing about really becoming knowledgeable, self-knowledgeable about our patterns and how our experiences are recurring in our lives is that it begins to open up into us being able to hear the calling of what we're destined for in a lifetime. We begin to hear the calling of our own hearts. And so this is a very precious inner work. It is the work of the spiritual path of individuation. Carl Jung used this word, which is not about just becoming a separate individual and getting better, self-improvement. Individuation is much, much bigger. It's an ordeal. It's an alchemical ordeal, in fact, of growth. And of course, growth always involves some breaking down, some death and rebirth and recurring patterns. Regina, you want to add anything about trunk and branches? It's a metaphor.
There's something beautiful about the stability of the trunk and the expansiveness of the branches. And if I look at my own life, what is my heartwood? What am I stable in? And what's expanding? What's in need of expansion?
Yeah, I love that. So what am I reaching for? Also, not reaching as in trying to make something happen, because a tree's reaching is effortless, right? It's effortless, just naturally doing that. It's just the natural expansion of the tree to branch out. I love that, the stability. And really, the more heartwood you have, the more stable the trunk is. Right.
I think that the meditation on that, like just sitting there and just connecting to the stability of the tree, of the trunk. I mean, a willow will float in the wind, but unless there is some kind of stability to it. And so just to tap into, what am I standing stable in? What can I rely on? Who am I in this storm? What can I fall back upon? What am I rooted in?
I love that. There's this, I think it's from a poem from Pablo Neruda. He says, "What has the tree learned from the earth so that it can reach for the stars?" So there's this continuity, there's this perfect connection and flow that's going on between the roots, the trunk, the branches, and the leaves and flowers and fruits of the tree. So maybe we should talk about those a little bit.
Great. Well, as Mary said, the crown of the tree, that's where the stuff is that gets shared. Shade. The crown gives us the shade that we need from this intense heat of climate or of the difficulties of life. But it's also where we have the berries, the pine cones that feed the animals, the seeds that sprout new trees, and the fruits that are eaten, the berries, the fruits, the pine cones, and so on, that nourish humanity. So as I look at this, I think I want to say to everybody, because I have to work with this myself, that we can spend a lot of our life force lamenting what we're not giving, what we're not sharing, what we're not doing, what we're not witnessing to. Our life on the path is about giving forth some kind of seed, shade, nourishment, and we don't necessarily honor ourselves for that. So if I were to ask you to make a list of what are the fruits of your life, what are the seeds in your life, maybe you haven't seen them sprout yet. They say it takes 80 years for a date palm to sprout. So you plant the date palm and you don't live to see it. But I think we've all done that. You've all had experiences, as I have, where somebody comes back to you 20 years later and says, what you said in class that day, that has changed my life. Or just meeting you. And I'd like to say to all of you, you are abundant with fruits and flowers and seeds and berries. And it's really important to keep honoring what it is that we are generating. We might be generating it through silence. We don't have to be generating it through words or writing books. But the more we can honor the outpouring, the outgrowth of our crown and what it is affecting in the world, this is affecting our mental health and our physical health as well.
That's great. As you're speaking, Regina, I'm thinking about this spiritual principle that it is not the art that we create or the service that we're doing. It's who we are when we're doing it. It's the state of being that we are in when we are doing it. Whatever service we're offering to life, whatever we're doing in the world, we're cooking a meal, we're talking to a friend, we're counseling a client, we're doing the work that we have to do at our job, whatever that is. It's not the outcome or the final result or the product. It's who are we when we're doing it. And I'm going back to this thing of how for the trees, it's effortless, this thing in Chinese Taoism of Wu Wei, effortless action. Like, how do we get to that? How do we become tree-like? The natural spontaneous, like responding to the sun. The tree responds to the sun, the call of the sun, the call of the air, the wind, the rain. Even the birds, that come to live in a tree, or the animals that live in the trees. One of Jung's concepts, one of his principal teachings, has to do with this word teleology, the telos or telos, depending on how you want to say it. Telos. It means that things are moving in a meaningful direction. There's meaning in what's unfolding. It's going somewhere. There's a calling. Something is being unfolded. And that which is being unfolded is being called forward by life, by the divine. It's a divine calling. All of it is a divine calling. Every single thing that we encounter is part of that. And that's pretty hard to wrap our head around. That's a lifetime piece of work for sure. As I'm thinking about this, about how the seeds, the leaves, of course, are how we relate to the sun, how we relate to the air, how are we taking in that fundamental grace of life. Leaves do that effortlessly. So the tree is also generating flowers, these beautiful embellishments. These flowers, they're like bursts of praise, but they're also, flowers are all about getting together with other flowers and exchanging various pollens and so on, and like procreating and making life happen some more. Like they're all about making love with other flowers, with other pine tree flowers or whatever, other magnolia flowers. So flowers are this gorgeous embellishment, and we're creating that too. We do that in our lives. And then there's the seeds, back to this telos, this teleology, because the seed contains the very thing that will come next. It's generative. And so it has this quality of legacy. So what is our legacy in the world? Legacy isn't about the books that I've written. I'm very interested. Like, what is it? What is my legacy at 75? I'm just starting to ask that question. There's no answer. And that's a good thing, because we want the questions that are going to work on us and really, really till the soil and bring air to our roots and let the water get into our roots so that we can just be fertile with the question and not try to like nail it and define it and all of that. So another thing about the flowers for me is the rasa, the sweetness of life, that there's also that aspect to who we are as a tree and the crown of the tree. In the Greek creation myths, long before the Olympian gods and goddesses came along, there's this primordial goddess of night. Her name is Nyx, Nyx. She's alone. She's the first thing that happens in creation. She's chaos, she's night, she's darkness, she's everything. And everything's going to come out of her. And she gives birth to all kinds of really scary things. She also gives birth to the three morai, the three fates that are spinning fate for every created being. She gives birth to many things, but one of the things that she gives birth to are the Hesperides, and these are the goddesses of the sunset. And those goddesses have the job of Hera, the wife of Zeus or Jupiter. Hera has these golden immortal apples. They're the apples of immortality. They contain the elixir of immortality. And the goddesses, the Hesperidae, they guard the garden where these apples grow. And so always think about this. They are the beauty, the fleeting beauty, the impermanence of the sunset. And yet there, in that moment of impermanent beauty, are the apples of immortality. And those come from a tree, an apple tree. So that's the fruiting part. So maybe the fruits of our life is about realizing that we are immortal beings. As Krishna says, you've been created. And so you will always be in some form or formlessness. Okay, those are my thoughts right now on fruits, seeds, and things.
You guys need to know how fun it is for us to play together like this. Really, this is really fun. You know, we play with each other on this. But now you got to do some work, at least 5 minutes worth. So get out a pen and paper. We'll give you a minute to find a pen and paper. I'm going to ask you to do a 5-minute write, because it's way fun when people participate. You know, health is a function of participation, somebody wise once said. So we've mentioned a lot of aspects of a tree, and we've used a lot of really beautiful words. The last thing Mary just said was legacy. Wow, what a prompt that is. Just my legacy. And the next sentence might be, what the heck? You know, question mark, question mark, question mark. But we've talked about my roots, blank. My trunk, my heartwood is, or isn't, or whatever. My branches, my fruits, and see where it takes you. It might take you to a list. It might take you to a fantasy. It might take you to a story. We're writing about some word or aspect that Mary and I touched upon, something that hit you at some point in the talk. 5 minutes. So it would be so lovely to hear from a few of you. We only have a short time before the end, but it's always so inspiring and interesting to hear what you might have written in 5 minutes. 5-minute writers.
Coming back to Iowa from the spaces of liberation and divine love enlightenment, my roots in the soil of Iowa along the Mississippi River, God is not only fully divine, but fully human. The soul ain't just Atman, but it's the joker in the deck, and it's wild. They said of my great-great-grandfather in church after he died, Shubal Adams was a true man of Israel. His words were felt like the blow of a hammer.
Well, I don't expect to get a very good grade because I didn't write during this time, but I just feel pulled to share anyway. And I was so struck, I just cannot drop this now, of the feelings that I had. I must have been 30 or 40 years ago. I was living communally in a house in Atlanta, Georgia, where the trees are very beautiful and where I grew up. Like you, Mary, I really miss the trees of the South and the changes and the beauty of them. The experience I'm looking back at was when I lived in this communal house, I would go for a walk. I would pass a set of 5 trees next to the sidewalk that were huge oak trees. And they weren't anything like the redwoods. But still, if I tried to get my arms around one, I couldn't go probably as far as half of the tree because the trunks were so huge to me. And I soon found that if I just touched the tree, even with just my hands against the tree trunk and just kind of leaned in it, I was connected to an energy that was so far beyond the earth that I was living on. It was like a mysterious experience to me, but it just like filled my whole body to feel that. And I wasn't sharing this with anyone until there was a woman in my household who was going through a lot of sadness and difficulty. And I brought her down and showed her how she could lean on the tree and feel that energy, which seemed just impossible to us, but there it was. And it would just feel your whole body to do that. I think that was one of the prime experiences in my life that led me to where I am now in the spiritual work that I'm in. And other experiences maybe were with music or other things, very rare. But I think feeling that energy would have me come back to, yes, I know there's something way beyond this life and something that I can be in contact with, the infinite, with the divine, with the whole world. So I think that contributed to the direction I went to when I finally left everything that I had ever been to come out west. And I'm 87 years old now. And still the memory from that far back is just very powerful for me. So thank you for letting me share that.
It's beautiful. Thank you.
Well, I'll read what I wrote, and I'd like to ask a question. My roots were inconsistently watered during my childhood. I did not feel so connected to the whole, and so developed in incomplete ways. There was sustenance provided at different times that helped me realize the direction that felt right to grow in toward the sun, and others who validated that it was possible for me to develop a trunk and branches. An imperfect tree can still stand strong in its treeness. My question is, do we need to go beyond our roots? I mean, I've just spent 4 days with a friend that I grew up with discussing our roots in some depth. And I felt very useful. But also, what brings us to go beyond our roots and to the realization of our immortality? Because when I think about my roots, I think about oh, that's who I am. And there is a lot more I sense.
Well, I would say there's a blueprint in the seed of who you are. And it's going to grow roots, but it's also going to grow a trunk, branches, leaves, flowers, and it's going to bear more seeds. It's the totality of the patterns of the tree. And the whole thing is moving toward what you were just saying, the calling to grow bigger toward the sun. There's the metaphor there. The sun is the metaphor of the divine totality. But I would say that impulse is already in the seed.
I like this. The blueprint of who you are is in the seeds.
Yes.
When you said your roots weren't well watered, so you grew in ways that were not necessarily this archetypal, perfect, straight, all-encompassing, gorgeous tree of life. But where we live in the desert, and anytime you go in a place where there's wind or water nearby, you see trees that are twisted, bent, leaning over to one side. They're all amazing, no matter what their formation. And so I think when you're asking, is it a place to go beyond the roots? I'm seeing that it's really because we're not letting that be the beauty. We're not seeing the beauty in that sort of very unconventional configuration that the tree is. And it's in that tree being itself, in its twistedness, that has possibility for isness, it's beingness. And I'm surrounded by twisted trees. And many of my branches are pretty twisted too. So,
well, thank God that there's divinity in the twistedness.
Yeah.
Well, in a situation where the tree is twisted, it's because the conditions of life created that. The seed was a perfect juniper, and the seeds that the tree will produce are perfect juniper trees. It's the wind and the rain and the storms and the fires that have created the tree to not be like the perfect specimen of its species, right? The seed is perfect. The seed that it starts with and the seed that it generates.
I'm also struck by this metaphor in yoga class where we do a tree pose. The idea of that, I think, is to really stand as you are, rooted, and to spread your branches. And, it's not all perfect by any means. We're all just shaking and trying to keep our balance. And then you just settle into it sometimes also.
I think the last thing we want to leave you all with is really, you can take any symbol that's meaningful to you and you can write about it, you can draw it. I'm drawing every morning now, not every morning, but many mornings when I move to, I draw and paint with watercolors. But whatever creativity, we wanted to really encourage you to work with creativity as a source of refuge. It's such a time of turmoil and uncertainty, and really any and all forms of creativity can be, and they are such a refuge for us. And it's a way that we get into a conversation with our own soul. I like this kind of old-fashioned Western esoteric way of saying to get in conversation with the holy guardian angel. The holy guardian angel is the self, the Atman. And so creativity as a way to take refuge in your own being and to find that conversation and to follow it and begin to listen more and more deeply. It's available to anybody. You don't have to be a writer, an artist, or whatever, have these like roles or ideas. Throw those concepts out, like Trungpa saying, they think that's a tree. Ha, 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 ha. Because it's this amazing being over there. We don't know what it is, right? It's the same for us in approaching creativity in any form. Just do it. Just let yourself do it. And make it the temple, make it your place of refuge where you go to have conversation with your holy guardian angel.
The word that keeps coming to me, and it was mentioned here, is the word praise. Yogi Ram Sarat Kumar, our teacher's guru, wanted us to praise. Praise, only praise, was the teaching. And it is so radical to assume that as a practice, to practice praise, because we have to have a counterbalance to the insanity of hatred and diminishment and undermining and polarization. And praise must start with the essence of the seed of our own being and then move out. Praise each other, praise your family, praise your friends, empower them to be the tree that they are. I think it's necessary. The more we live in this world, the more we have to praise.
Thank you so much for your listening ear tonight. It's been a pleasure to be with you in this way and to share the beauty of trees with you. Thank you very much.